It's time to get the breakdown started. 1, 2, 3, First up, 10 observations.
Just took his guy and just boom, just put him right on the ground.
It's First and 10.
Yep, we're back. It's First and 10. If you haven't been with us during football season, this is how we open the show the day after a Commanders game. We have 10 observations from it, and we'll get started with number one, which is that Kliff Kingsbury really, to me, was kind of the star of this preseason game. I thought the way that he showed that his offense is going to operate, and including, by the way, the Jayden Daniels deep ball, is really exciting, and it shows an understanding of kind of who they want to be offensively, and it shows an understanding of how offenses work in 2024 in the NFL that, frankly, was not here last year. And so to go inside that play, and Dan Quinn talked about afterwards how Jayden really wasn't supposed to check, not because it's not the right check, because it's the preseason and because he was playing behind a backup O-line. They were being very particular on what kind of freedom that he had and not wanting to expose him to hits. But it was also very vanilla, everything that they were doing. Like, because audibles are not like that complex sometimes. It's just like, hey, yeah, no, this is a thing that we should do here. And so we want to do it. And it's day one install. Hey, if you get this look and we call this play, or like part of the day one install is like, okay, play X. If you get this look, don't run the play. Audible to this. And it is so fundamental to who the Commanders are offensively that Jayden Daniels, even when he wasn't supposed to, ultimately was like, I know what I'm supposed to do here. Audible, check, blah, 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 set hut, deep ball. And it is an illustration. I guess this is really the point. If you want to get real technical with it. Oh, come on, don't do this to me now. With the hotkeys up, Anthony, we're gonna have to go manual numbers today because we have an internal processing error in the operation. Number one is that Kliff Kingsbury's reputation as someone who knows how to make the game easy for quarterbacks and pass catchers was on display with that. It is so fundamental to who they are that Jayden, even though he wasn't supposed to, was like, I know what to do here. Check, bang. And then you obviously get the greatness of what we expect from Jayden Daniels, which is a tremendous deep ball thrower on routes outside the numbers. And hey, good for Jamin Brown as well. Getting into good situations. This is the takeaway, right? Getting into good situations is fundamental to who the Commanders are offensively. And that is a great way to play. Now, that will become harder as the season goes because teams get tape on you, and this has been a problem for Kliff in the past. So I don't want to be so rosy and optimistic that I brush away everything that has been his career from Texas Tech to Arizona, where his teams fade in the back half of years. They've got to find ways to keep things easy ultimately in the long run when you get into December and January, which is somewhere this team hopes to be, if not this year. I mean, they'll play in December and some in January because the schedule is 17 games long. But you know what I mean in terms of playing well and then ultimately playing into late January. If he wants to get there as a coach, and certainly if the Commanders want to get there with him as their OC, there's going to have to be better than what we've seen in the past out of him. But on a baseline level to start a season entering, Kliff has always been excellent at getting things right situationally. Part duh of that, I don't say
Number
that.
two.
That very well done, Anthony. Thank you. Is that they spread the ball around. The Jets had 10 different players have targets, which that feels right for a preseason game. The Commanders had 17 players get targets. 17. That's basically every running back that played, every tight end that played, and every receiver that played. Terry McLaurin, not out there very long, had a target. Jahan Dotson was out there for a long time. We'll talk about that more in about 5 minutes. Jahan Dotson got targets. OZ, Olamide Zaccheaus, got targets. Jamin Brown got the multiple targets. Got the deep one, although that was kind of a Jayden call, but he did get one with Driscoll later and made a nice catch. All the tight ends. Cole Turner gets targets. Ben Sinnott, probably the best tight end out there. Great. If you played, I guess outside of I don't know if John Bates got one, but he was busy blocking his face off. You got to target. And that is also fundamental to who Kliff is. And it makes it very hard to defend because ultimately, like, I think Kliff trusts his fourth receiver over your fourth corner. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. Not that Olamide Zaccheaus and De'Ami Brown or anyone else who winds up being the fourth, Luke McCaffrey, whoever is ultimately wide receiver 4 on this football team, not that they're actually outstanding wide receiver 1 caliber players, but they're going to be a solid wide receiver 4, true NFL receiver. And most teams aren't that deep if you got to go true dime quarterback situation. Those dudes don't get a lot of snaps. They don't get to play a lot. And Kliff puts them in tough spots. And sometimes, it's linebackers and stuff because they do stuff formationally with some of the tight ends and create certain matchups. So there's just a really cool identity, in my opinion, forming for the Commanders offensively, and it's cohesive. It's one that fits the quarterback skill set. It's one that fits the play caller's preferred style. It's one that fits their personnel. Guys like De'Ami and Terry, Jahan also, their 4-3 guys can get deep. So this is something that I think is going to be really fun to watch. And then the last part of it, Anthony, if you will, number 3.
Number 3
is the use of personnel, not just to create good matchups in the passing game, but one thing I really love is I guess technically it's an extension of the running game, but it's the passing game, is on some of these screens, but also in the running game, the quarterback run game specifically, using formation and personnel to get good blocking matchups. And this is part, I'm sure, Kliff, but also, let's give credit on all this stuff, to Brian Johnson, to Anthony Lynn, to Bobby Johnson, and on down the list of coaches and coordinators and whoever else, special assistants, whatever all these dudes' titles are that have a role to play in this. Their ability to say, okay, Cole Turner, not the world's greatest blocker, although we'll talk about Turner as the show goes. That dude is trying to make this team. He is playing as hard as he can. And I don't know if he's ultimately going to do it, but man, is he forcing the issue. And he deserves a ton of credit for that. But they know he's not John Bates. He's not the best blocker. He's not Sinnott. He's not George Kittle. He's not whoever, right? So let's have him block a corner. How do we get it so that he's the furthest guy on the outside, and that if Jayden Daniels keeps this, that he gets to drive a corner through the back of the end zone? Let's set our guys up to win. And it's not possible all the time. There's some times in this game where Bates gets stuck on a D end or whatever, and stuff like that happens. And that's John Bates' job ultimately, as the wide tight end. Is sometimes he's going to have to block a defensive end. Logan talks about having to do that sometimes, and it's it's just part of the gig. But if you really are going after something in a big situation, red zone, always a big situation, and you want to set your guys up for maximal success, how do you formation things and use your personnel intelligently? And Cole Turner blocking a corner is great. Cole Turner having to block a defensive end, not going to end well. Cole Turner blocking a linebacker, not even ideal because he's not a great blocker. But he's trying, and you set him up in a corner, and he drives him literally out of the end zone. Bravo, Kliff, and everybody else involved in the process. Bravo, Cole Turner, and bravo, Jayden Daniels on reading it out correctly and waltzing into the end zone.
Number 4.
And let's get into some of the players now. Jahan Dotson played 32 snaps in this game, the most of any non-offensive lineman. The only guys that played more were guys like Mason Brooks and Chris Paul, who moved around the line and played with multiple units. And we'll talk about the O-line situation later on in 1st and 10. But the fact that Jahan played this much, I think, is pretty fascinating. I still think he's going to wind up being a starter on this team unless something unexpected happens, and I'll touch more on that in a second. I'm not trying to be coy. But I think they want to see more out of him. I think that there's a physicality and a toughness that you need to play with to play for this current iteration of this staff that I don't know that Jahan plays with. And to be clear, I don't think it's because Jahan lacks toughness and want to. And it's not actually even toughness. It's play strength. It's a stylistic choice that they want. I'll use a name that's I'm using this name because he's someone that was drafted by Adam Peters, not because I'm trying to start something. But Brandon Ayuk plays physical as hell. Debo Samuel, I could have used him, I guess, too. Plays so physical. They're strong. They run through contact as ball carriers, but also as route runners. And there's a play in this game where Jahan, it's when he gets targeted on the deep ball and he gets pushed off the route a little bit. And that's the kind of stuff that he's got to figure it out. And part of it is a toughness that can be learned. Again, it's not like a mentality thing. I don't think Jahan is weak-minded or anything. But like, you have to learn the tools to ultimately fight through that stuff. And he hasn't yet. And so, yes, there's the weightlifting part of getting physically stronger that has to happen in the offseason and will continue to happen during the season. But it's also him working with Bobby Ingram in the position group to understand how to fight through some of that stuff. And it's a part of this offense. It's part of what you need because they want to run vertical routes. They want to get you down the field. But if you can be easily knocked off your track, like that causes not only issues for you, but spacing issues in the offense for others. Part of the De'Ami Brown completion from Jayden is, I think it's a tight end that's running up the seam. It might be Turner. Like, he holds his line, and there's good spacing on that play, which leaves plenty of room for De'Ami. The other side is well spaced, which makes Jayden holding the safety with his eyes so effective because it's real. There's a real threat there. And so I just think that for Jahan, I wonder if he fits what they want. And if not, he could fit better somewhere else. And so I guess this is kind of the point that I'm going to make about him, and I'm going to make about Emmanuel Forbes next. It's not necessarily that they're bad football players or that they're not good or whatever, anti-superlative you want to put on them, but they might not be good commanders. And ultimately, that's what Adam Peters is trying to build and Dan Quinn is trying to build they're trying to build their version of the Commanders. And so if someone came with a good offer for Jahan Dotson, like, it would not surprise me for a second if they were just like, yeah, no, that's good. Like, go ahead, we'll take the draft capital. And that's not me reporting anything. I haven't talked to anybody. I've been in France for 10 days. But that to me makes too much sense watching this. Clearly they want to see more, and I think they're trying to also figure out what his superpower is, because that is a Dan Quinn philosophy, to figure out what guys' superpowers are and put them in the right position, and I don't think they've figured out with Jahan yet, despite the fact that he was a legitimate first-round pick. Maybe some teams would have taken him in the second, but a really talented guy who has great route-running ability and good hands and all these kinds of things that made him a first-round pick for Washington a couple years ago. Speaking of first-round picks a couple years ago.
Number 5.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Emmanuel Forbes. Emmanuel Forbes, if you did like a chart of red dot, green dot, good plays, bad plays, would have way more green dots than red dots. And I think that should be said as context. Unfortunately, the red dot is he gave up a touchdown after he gave up some big plays in the joint practices to Garrett Wilson, which, okay, he's Garrett Wilson, but he gave up big plays to Terry McLaurin in practice. And, okay, well, it's Terry McLaurin. Like, eventually you got to stop giving up big plays. And in a league that is more geared towards explosive plays than ever, as the smartest coaches figured out, wow, I think I know what scores points in this league. Big chunks of yardage. How do we generate explosives? And as a defense, it doesn't matter how well we play down in, down out. If we give it all away, we undo all our good work in one play. It just is too damaging to have a guy that gives up this many explosive plays. And I think, unlike the guy we're going to talk about next in Jamin Davis, you hear people talk about Forbes a little differently in terms of the mistakes and the corrections and the buy-in that is happening right now. And, we watched the All-22 back of this play actually right before the show. Anthony and I were like, let's go check out what happened. And it's simple. Like, it's a go ball, and technique is poor. He's too square. You give up, you want to kind of gear your guy towards something. Once he's getting vertical, it's like, okay, well, then I'm going to push you outside. I'm going to use what you're trying to do against you. I'm going to use my shoulder to get into your chest and kind of guide you out of the way of the ball. Like, and his eyes are in the backfield. He knows the fade ball's coming. Like, you can see it. And so I struggle because when I hear Forbes talk, I like the kid. I think he definitely got off to a bad start last year, and I think it's set him off on a track that is bad. And it's the same kind of thing I said about Dotson. If they got the right call for him, it would not surprise me at all if they moved him. And I honestly wonder if it's best for both parties. I don't think he can't play. I think he'll probably wind up starting if he's here, because he is better than the other guys around. but he can't keep giving up big plays. And they've got to figure out how to get him to not do that. And then they've also got to figure out how to get him the ball production that made him special at Mississippi State and ultimately why he's a first-round pick. He's physically gifted as hell. I know he's really light and he's slender, but he's got crazy long arms. He's very fast. He's got good feet. And it's just putting that together on the one part of his game that is killing him right now, which is giving up vertical routes, which is the worst thing that you can have as an Achilles heel as a DB.
Number 6.
I would say down in, down out, Emmanuel Forbes is probably playing better than Jamin Davis. But we even heard from Jamin today post-practice. We'll play some of this audio coming up in our Pick 6 later on. The enthusiasm that Jamin has attacked this new position switch with is something that has made the coaches, I think, willing to continue on with this experiment. It's funny watching the game because the things that Jamin did the best are linebacker things. He pursued the ball and he tackled. He was in and around the ball quite a bit in the run game. He set a couple of good edges. He also had a couple that were bad. Situationally, terrible. On that 3rd and 7, I think it was, towards the end of the game, in the 2-minute, the one that led to the game-winning field goal. It's a 3rd down. He gets washed inside, like he tries to make a move inside, and situationally, you can't do that. He leaves open a quarterback scramble, quarterback runs, 1st down, Jets kick the game-winning field goal. It's the preseason. I don't care about the loss. It's just like, hey, man, if you're going to do this, you got to have the situational awareness here to make that happen. And so I think it's interesting hearing Dan Quinn say that he's actually surprised them as kind of a edge setter and some of the 1st and 2nd down stuff that you need, while the pass rush thing is just not come along in the way that I think the plan was. But because he's so dedicated to it, because Jamin's head is on straight, because he is showing up with a great attitude, a great work ethic, and because he's so physically gifted that he's not like he's got all these traits, I think they're going to keep going with it. And one of the things we did before I left was a roster projection. I didn't have Jamin on it. If I had to do one today, I would change that. And it has everything to do with the things they're saying about him, the things he's saying, and kind of some of the rumblings you hear, guys like Kime reporting about the things that they value in the building that he has. And so I really, honestly, I'm not sitting here saying like, kudos Jamin Davis on an awesome game. Nope, it was a huge learning experience. And it's the first time he's played for real at defensive end. I'm actually more positive on Jamin and some of the things that I'm hearing and some of the things that are being said than I was before I left, even though the results are really not all that different.
Number 7.
All right, number 7, the offensive line situation. We'll run through these last couple real quick. If this Brandon Coleman thing is going to wear on, they need to bring in a veteran, and they need to just do it now. Coleman needs to be the starter because we see in this game and we see in the joint practices the limitations Trent Scott has. Cornelius Lucas is a great stopgap, but he's very, very limited athletically, and it's going to limit your offense. And we talked about Kliff earlier and how much he likes the screen game and spreading the ball around, and it's just limiting. You can't do that stuff with the left tackle who can't move. It doesn't have the movement skill to be out on the perimeter, and Cornelius Lucas just doesn't have that. That's not how he's built. That's not what he's good at. Straight up pass blocking, okay, fine. It's a movement in small spaces in the run game, fine, but he doesn't have the mobility. And so there aren't a lot of guys available, but you got to figure it out. And the fact that they were like, I know what we'll do with all these tackle issues. We're going to start Chris Paul. I mean, good for Chris, one, because he thought he played well. I think it also, another compliment to Kliff. Kliff called the game like he had backup offensive linemen in. And by the way, they ran the ball pretty well inside where their starters were. So there's some good there from the offensive line. There's some great stuff from Kliff. But that doesn't change the reality that you need to have a starting caliber left tackle or the best one you can possibly have. And if Brandon Coleman's hurt, I would hope that there's another option available.
Number 8.
Frankie Louvu, Mike Sainer still showed the flashes of what I think are going to make them both special players for this team, hopefully for a long time. I mean, Louvu only played like 4 or 5 snaps, but he has a big tackle for loss. Like, he's lining up at DN on 3rd down situations, and it's really fun to see, and I'm excited to see him in full bore. Sainer still obviously played a lot more, and on that same play that he and Louvu combined, you just see the pursuit. And, Logan and I were talking about this on the phone actually earlier today. I don't think it actually made the Take Command podcast that we recorded. But Sainer still is a really special mover. Like, he's just a very fluid athlete. Obviously played wide receiver and now plays DB. And he's so instinctual, and you combine that, and the game just looks easy for him because he knows where he's supposed to be, and he has the movement skills to get there. And so I can't wait to watch more of this kid moving forward.
Number 9.
Bryson Tremaine continues to show why he's around. I do think it's interesting that they are going to work out Martavius Bryant, apparently, another big wide receiver. But Tremaine continues to show, like, hey, being tall has a place in the NFL at receiver. And I know he had another route later in the game, another target that didn't go great, but I didn't love the throw on that. I think overall, Tremaine continues to play well, continues to play hard, and I would still have him on the team. So Bryson Tremaine, train, let it continue, choo-choo. Last but not least.
Number 10.
I know everyone wants to crush Chris Rodriguez today, and no one thinks he's going to make the team because he had 6 rushes for 0 yards. The blocking in front of him at that portion of the game was not great, Bob. Not good at all. I do like what I see from Wiley. I've liked what I've seen from him all camp. I thought it was interesting that McNichols was the third guy in. I think that situation is very, very fluid behind B-Rob and Eckler, who both were excellent in their limited reps on that first drive. But I don't think that the Chris Rodriguez story is over quite yet. I'm not saying that he's actually making the team and is a lock or anything, but I don't think that, I would say this. I think the reports of Chris Rodriguez's demise are slightly premature and circumstantial, and we'll see ultimately if he can turn it around in the back half of training camp.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.